So, and clearly DOD has the biggest budget of all the different agencies. Now, one of the things I know, I never worked at DOD, although I was asked to work at DOD, but I worked at HUD. And I know all the different resources and reforms I instituted when I was there to make sure they could produce impeccable and perfect financial statements. And what I have to tell you, having gone through many of their financial statements since that time, is everything they say about why they can't produce, audited financial statements or why they have undocumentable adjustments is a complete fraud. Okay? It's just a total lie. They're lying. So there's no reason or excuse for them to have anything less than impeccable financial statements. Certainly all the corporate contractors and banks who are running their financial statements and information systems are perfectly capable of producing SEC quality financial statements every year. So believe me, they have the resources. There's no excuse. Anyway, so I started to do radio shows because in fiscal 2015, which was then reported in 2016, the Department of Defense announced $6.5 trillion of undocumentable adjustments in that year alone, and HUD had almost $300 billion, which for HUD's budget is unprecedented. So I started to talk about it on the radio, and Dr. Mark Skidmore, who was a professor at Michigan State University, heard me and said, "Oh, she must be wrong. 6.5 trillion is many, many multiples of DOD and the Army's budget. The 6.5 trillion was at the Army." So, and let me just say, an undocumentable adjustment can be a revenue or an expense.
Okay.
So 21 trillion is missing, but we may be laundering, so if we're selling oil in Iraq, if we're seizing countries and selling their natural resources and laundering the money back in, so that could be 21 trillion could be 10.5 trillion of revenues and 10.5 trillion of expenditures, through the books. So Dr. Skidmore heard me and said, "Look, it's impossible that it's 6.5 trillion. She must be making a mistake. It's billion." So he dived in and looked at the financial statements and discovered, voila, I was right. It was 6.5 trillion. He called me. Next thing you know, we decided he agreed to get a group of students and do a complete comprehensive survey of all of the financial documents at DOD and HUD from fiscal 1998, when this started, to 2015. Now, I had the number up to 12.5 trillion. He and his students got the number up to 21 trillion. And he kept calling me and saying, "You're not going to believe me. You're not going to believe this. We found another trillion. We found another trillion." And finally, we hit 21 trillion, which at the time was the same number as the official outstanding debt of the United States.
That's right. That's always been on my mind, and I was going to ask you about that. Do you see any reason for any correlation? Is it just the fluke of the strangest things in nature?
Here's what I think. I think that there's something about that resonates, and the reason is, if you look at, I think what's been happening is they've been issuing Treasury securities, and then the money's disappearing out the back door. The assets or the technology is disappearing out the back door. And so the game continues. And so there is a relationship between the money missing out the back door and how much they've been borrowing. And I think that's why somehow it resonates with people.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but, in theory that I know of, there's no perfect correlation between the two.
Right.
But it is suggestive.
What additional actions then did you take? You talked about this on air. You collaborated with an academic partner.
Skidmore and I began talking about this on air. The first thing that happened, I think the next week or the week after, was there was a fire at the New York Fed. It's amazing. No, it's amazing how many of these databases have fires or blow up. It's quite. I mean, when 9/11, when the World Trade Center came down, and remember the whatever it was that flew into the Pentagon just happened to hit the Office of Naval Intelligence offices that happened to be doing an investigation in the so-called missing money. At that point, it was only 3.3 trillion. Remember, the day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld stood up and said there's 2.3 trillion missing in the last year in the DOD financials. 2.3 trillion.
Right, that was on CBS News, I think. Yep.
If you go to Solari.com, on the homepage, we have a slider of 3 videos. One is called Congressional Collection, and it has all the different, it has excerpts from different press conferences and different congressional testimony that show you examples of all this money that's missing. So it's quite extraordinary. Between the missing money and the bailouts, we're talking about essentially $50 trillion that's gone missing from the federal government.
That sum is just unthinkable to ordinary people. I mean, even our national debt has always been beyond grasping, I think, for most people. But what you in addition to bringing this publicly, go ahead.
Here's one reason. I think one reason people are skeptical that this is real is because it's such a large number. But I assure you, if you look at with globalization, it's very interesting. In 1997, I had an investment bank in Washington, and I had a board, I had a subsidiary that was doing research on working with the board of pension fund advisors on how we could re-engineer the American economy and do it in a way so that the pension funds could improve their performance coming into the boomers' retirement. Right. We're very concerned that there wouldn't be sufficient retirement money for the boomers. So I made a presentation in the spring of 1997. We were out at Safeguard Scientifics, where one of the board members was part of a money management group. And I made a presentation, and I had believed, based on the prototyping we had done on how to turn around low-income communities and get government money out of communities, that there was absolutely a way to do it. So basically my theory was, okay, we create enormous prosperity and really help everybody rise into the middle class, and that's going to create so much wealth that the pension funds can, one, government will save a huge amount of money, but then the pension funds can make their targets. Anyway, the head of CalPERS, the president of CalPERS, which is the largest pension fund in the country, looked at me and he said, "You don't understand, it's too late." I said, "Too late? What do you mean it's too late?" He said, "They have given up on the country. They're moving all the money out starting in the fall." Now, I thought he meant that the pension funds had been ordered to reallocate higher portions of their equity portfolios to the emerging markets, or their bond and equity portfolios. Wrong. The beginning of the next fiscal year was October 1, 1997. That's the beginning of the federal fiscal 1998 year. Okay. That's when money suddenly started flying out. I mean, literally started flying out of the government agencies. And what was interesting, I was in Washington during that time, money was pouring into these money managers. So Carlyle, which was a relatively new firm, the money was just, they were raising a China fund, and all of a sudden, boom, they had $1 billion, and you're like, where did this money come from? Well, I think, frankly, it got pulled out of the U.S. government. So when the president of CalPERS said they're moving all the money out starting in the fall, I think he literally meant they're moving all the money. And so assets were being shifted out of the U.S. government. So look at it from a very high level. Let's just pretend, my nickname for the committee that runs the world is Mr. Global. So let's just say you're Mr. Global. You're looking at the boomer retirements on Social Security and pension funds. Yeah. And right now, you're depending on the boomers to put money into those vehicles, right, and you're using that money to finance your operation. Okay? So you can't afford to give that money back because you need fresh money every year. Mm-hmm. So if they retire and ask for the money back, you've got a $2 problem. Right now, they're putting $1 in. So on Social Security, we've been buying Treasury securities, and that puts $1 into the government. Mm-hmm. The minute we say, okay, we're retiring, we need the money back, now I've got a $2 problem because I've got to come up with $1 and I'm not getting that fresh
You
dollar.
Lost the revenue, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So it doesn't take a no-brainer to say, well, wait a minute. If I get all the money out of the U.S. government, if I shift all the money out of the pension funds and I fill them up with treasuries, then when they're ready to retire, they'll have IOUs from themselves, and then they can work it out themselves. And I'll have the assets free and clear. It's a financial coup d'etat.
So we've always worried about the plundering of the Social Security Trust Fund that happened. We were told it was just through general expenses and so on, or balancing the budget during the Clinton years or whatever. But you're saying that that money has all been moved out and is not there anymore.
Well, so here's how it works. I put $1 into Social Security, right? Mm-hmm. The dollar goes into the Social Security Fund and buys a Treasury security. So now the dollar goes into the government. The government disappears, the dollar disappears out the back door into a private company or bank. Now the government has an undocumentable adjustment on its financial statements. And what do I get back? I get an IOU. I get a Treasury security, which says I, as a taxpayer, have to make good on it. My house, my land, my real estate, my business is collateral, and I now owe myself that dollar. So I took $1 of cash and translated it into an IOU for myself.
Following this theory, then, one way of describing the missing $21 trillion is to say that that's what's been theft from the American people?
Well, that's the question. In other words, if the federal government has refused for more than 25 years to comply with any of the laws, and we need to talk about FASB 56 because they've now changed the law to say they don't have to provide financial disclosure,
right,
despite the fact that's unconstitutional. You know, you tell me. I can't prove that it's all gone because I have no financials. You know, for 25 plus years, I haven't gotten reliable financial statements, so I can't tell you what's true. I know that their documents refuse to produce audited financial statements. I know that their documents say that there's 21 trillion of undocumentable adjustments, and I know they've now changed the law so they can keep their books secret. What that would say to me is there's a problem.
What official inquiries or requests for explanation or whatever have you made to the government, and what official replies have you gotten back?
So if you go to missingmoney.solera.com and click on DoD HUD in the navigation bar, you will see Dr. Skidmore's report and all the updates. And on the homepage and the other things, you'll also see a listing of the different interviews with Dr. Skidmore. And in it, he describes all of his efforts. Now, many years ago, I worked with a lot of reporters and made tremendous number of efforts to communicate with the government. I've long since given up. He hadn't given up, so he kept trying.
Okay.
But anyway, but he describes in his various updates. Now, one of the things I wanted to show you, maybe you can see this through the screen, I finally decided that we had to take all of the information, because we've had so much trouble with hacking and cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Take all of the information that documented the missing money, whether it was, I wrote a very big report for institutional investors last February, or this February, called Caveat Emptor. And then I hired 2 attorneys to write 7 briefing papers. If you're an institutional investor but you don't understand the law, it's difficult. So 7 briefing papers to explain the constitutional and legislative and other regulatory aspects of what financial management is supposed to be.
Okay.
And the Skidmore's report, a whole lot of the documentation, and I decided I've got to get this in hard copy and send it all over the world, because the internet is just not reliable. There's too much disappearing. There's too much hacking. I want to make sure this is out forever. Anyway, but we put a cover on it because I'm a great believer that you've got to explain something in one page, right? So let me see if I can walk you through it. So it's called The Real Game of Missing Money. The U.S. government says the money they spend should be secret. What's that about? This is no game, it's real. Okay, so we start here. We work hard, pay our taxes, obey the law, save for retirement and our kids. See, we put our money in the piggy bank. So we put our money in pension funds, and we put our money in IRAs, 401ks, credit unions, and our insurance policies. We put it into Social Security. We donate to our church, our school, our town. We pay our taxes. And then the money is used to buy U.S. Treasury securities. So
far, so good.
And then that money goes through a secret set of books, all secret. And the banks and defense contractors are running and managing it. And their securities and stocks go up. Some of it funds what I would call fake news, okay? So I'm talking with you, you're not fake news, you're real news. But we have a ton of fake news. We get bailouts and buyouts, 50 trillion on bailouts, buyouts, and missing money. We have global surveillance, so we have a one-way mirror where we're funding surveillance systems to watch all of us. We have an industrial prison industry. We got secret space programs and I would say hundreds of billions of dollars of underground facilities. And the result is, what do we get? We get an IOU, and we're sitting here at the dead end.
Yeah, in the game of the old board game of life, you end up in the poorhouse at the end. Yeah, if you don't.
Right.
Yeah.
So we put in an asset. Well, how much is 21 trillion? It's $65,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. So imagine, and we add the bailouts, and you're talking about 150,000 per person. So just imagine what you could do in terms of paying off your debt, sending a child to college, if you had that 150,000.
Yeah, we've got 5 kids, so that would make over $1 million for our family's share of that.
Right. Right. And so one of the reasons we have student loans in this country is, while that money was disappearing, these kids were, instead of their parents being able to pay for their college, were taking on student loans. So again, you put an asset in, and what do you get? You get an IOU that you're liable for. You've turned an asset into a liability by going through the real game of missing money.
So you weren't getting responses from the official government inquiries, but you're still working on getting this word out to the people. It seems like there's a couple of big dominoes that need to fall here. One would be, what does this do to the credit rating of the United States? And then what does it do to the public confidence once enough people grasp what's going on? Why wouldn't there just be a revolt, a financial revolt? But let's start one of those at a time. Well, financial rating first.
So here's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping enough trustees and pension funds and enough people in the financial system,
major stakeholders,
enough institutional investors, particularly the pension fund leaders, because in my experience, not currently, but when I was still an investment banker, if you look at the quality people who are leading pension funds and pension funds, very high quality people.
Okay.
If you get enough people at the pension funds and enough people in state and local government understanding both. Because part of this, I'll just show you, our section on the law. Okay, so our section on the law in Volume 1 starts in 76. You go through all these briefing papers, goes through the black budget, through classification, national security, all these things. It goes to, it's about 100 pages long.
Okay.
If they understand the law and also what's happening,
yes,
then that will give them a portion of the leverage they need to start to change things. Because this can't, to a certain extent, you have to come up through the machinery and start to turn it. And it's going to take thousands of incremental steps. And so you want the people involved in that machinery and the nuts and bolts of that machinery to start to understand and to start to turn. And the first thing that has to happen is in October. Remember when everybody was keenly interested in Mr. Kavanaugh's teenage sex life?
Yeah, unfortunately.
And so you would have thought that there was a very poor relationship between the administration and the Congress and between the Republicans and Democrats during that period, right?
That would be the cover story.
Okay, that's the cover story. That week, the Trump administration and bipartisan leadership in both House and Senate instituted FASB 56. Now, there's a full document on FASB 56 here. Let me explain what it is. FASB 56 gives a small secret group of people the power, by a small secret process that we can't know, to take any portion of all the government agencies and approximately 150 additional related entities in the federal government and take whatever they want and put it in secret books. What that means is when you're looking at the financial statements for a federal government agency or the U.S. government, it's totally meaningless. Okay? Now, in combination with the classification laws and the national security laws that allow the National Security Director to waive SEC requirements for government contractors and banks who do business with the government, in combination with FASB 56, you just took the majority of the U.S. securities market completely dark. If you invest in a U.S. stock or bond, most U.S. stocks or bonds, I'll give you an example. In the back of this book, we have a list. Here you go. Here are the top 100 government contractors, okay? Big part of the U.S. stock market.
Right.
Here are the primary dealers of U.S. government securities, and here are the big broker-dealers and managers, okay? Big part of the U.S. stock market or big players in the U.S. stock market. You have no idea what their financial statements mean. None. None. There's no way to know. You don't know. When you pick up if I pick up the government's budget, now it gets worse, okay?
Okay.
So why would a government pass something like FASB 56? You're basically talking about a change of the governance system through an obscure accounting policy, okay? You've taken the U.S. government from being a republic to something else, run by a secret group of people, by a secret process that you're not allowed to know what it is. I mean, you've gone from being a constitutional republic to a star chamber. Okay? So, I mean, at least in a fascist government, you know who's running it, right?
Yes.
Here, this is fascism or something else by sea. I mean, it really is a star chamber. Okay, and so this is an obscure government policy. And I think they believe that no one would notice, and we could just all going along pretending that Oz was fine. Mm-hmm. But it's not. Okay, so the first thing that has to happen is if you get enough pension fund leaders, enough federal, state and local officials together, the first thing we need to do is tear up FASB 56. We can't function as a government if everything is secret. And if, the financials are meaningless. It's a one-way mirror. The NSA is listening and recording every word you and I say on the phone, or every word I say on the internet.
Right.
Bill Binney has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt they didn't need to do that. I think the reason they needed to do it was their corporate contractors wanted all that data because they wanted to sell porn, and they wanted to sell consumer goods, and they wanted to sell a variety of different services. They wanted to get your kid addicted to video games. So having a 24/7 complete surveillance on 325 million people in America, and God knows what globally, would be very lucrative, right? So it's a one-way mirror, and what they're saying is, we're not going to provide you with any disclosure about what we did with the money we got from you, but we have a right to invade your home, to invade your phone, to invade your computer, and do complete 24/7 surveillance on you. And not only that, the companies who are doing that 24/7 surveillance of you are being paid with your tax dollars. So we're financing our own destruction. And FASB 56 makes it all completely possible.